The sky changed color above Darnath's sector as if it had been sliced open by a blade forged in hatred. And it was not storm or fire that came through, but something far older, something not born of galaxy or time, something that had watched planets form and shatter long before humans named the stars. And now, it was here, watching again, choosing, marking the world below as it drifted in silence across the atmosphere, its black hull like a hole in the world. And though it made no sound, every creature, every mind, every satellite screamed beneath it. For this was the eye of Calrith, and when it blinked, something died. It did not arrive in a ship. It was the ship and the sky and the dread that leaked into every dream across 6 colonies. And the signal it sent was not in words, but in pulses that burned into skin and memory, and no one escaped the mark, for it appeared on wrists, necks, hearts, as if clawed in by an unseen hand. And when the children woke crying, it was already too late. Military scanners failed, satellites fried, communication arrays stuttered into static. And when the first defensive fleet approached, it vanished one by one, not destroyed, just gone clean, like they had never existed. And that was when the governors declared planetary silence, and the people began to hide and pray and vanish into mountain caves, thinking they could wait it out like a winter storm. But this was not weather, this was judgment. And as panic grew, so did the stories, whispered through flickering screens, of a thing that walked where no one else could, a creature who blinked and unmarked, the cursed, a myth, a man, a soldier no longer in uniform, just known by one name across 100 terrified tongues. Jalen. They said Jalen had no home, no past, that H survived the Skorvax ice collapse when 3 continents fell into the sea, that H walked away from the failed colony on Thassos, where the plants grew teeth and drank blood, that H once held hands with the dying god, who whispered truths into his bones. And now he wandered system to system, not for coin, not for glory, but because something in him refused to stop. He looked like nothing and everything, like a worker, like a vagabond, like someone who had seen the inside of fire and chosen to live anyway. His eyes not broken, but scarred with something no scanner could read. And he spoke little, but when he did, people listened, not because he was loud, but because he had seen the blink and survived. Jalen had watched the eye hover above a mining world for 9 days and nights before it vanished, leaving not death, but silence. And in that silence, he had walked into the core chamber, where the remaining survivors knelt, and he had touched the forehead of a child whose mark peeled away like ashen wind. And that child had lived, and the rumor was born that he was a counterforce, not an answer, but a pause, a break in the fury of the beast. Now, with Calrith casting its shadow across Darren's sector and the marks glowing brighter, people whispered for Jalen, for the unmarked one, and deep within the broken infrastructure of a fallen trade station, Jalen stood over a map drawn in blood and dust, listening to the cries of a mother whose daughter bore the triple sigil, and he knew the beast had chosen her for a spectacle. Jalen did not make promises, he only moved, and when he moved, stars held their breath. Calrith did not need voice, it did not need body, it was will-made form, it was the end. Before beginnings, it hovered above the capital city, without engines, without flame, and every second it did not move. The people below died a little more inside because they knew it could end them, and yet it watched as if searching for something specific. As if marking was not enough, as if it waited for resistance. It sent no soldiers, it did not need to, it sent images, visions, into the minds of those it marked, and in those visions, they saw their own deaths over and over, each time more vivid, more certain, until they broke under the pressure and offered their lives willingly. Walking into the sea, the sky, into the flame, and those who tried to hide soon found that the mark bled light and sound, and they were found. The governors fell next, not by weapons but by despair, their minds crumbling as the sigil expanded across their skin. And when they tried to nuke the eye. Their weapons turned against them, as if Calorith owned the laws of physics within its field. But one man walked into the chaos without mark and without fear. And when Calorith saw Jalen, blinked, and in that blink, 5 towers collapsed, not because of malice, but because it had not expected to hesitate. And Jalen saw that and smiled. He held no weapon, only a shard of something old, something carved from the ruins of a forgotten war, something etched in symbols that predated language. And when he lifted it, the air shimmered as if space itself remembered pain. Jalen stepped into the mark field, a place where no living thing had walked for more than a moment before collapsing in agony. And yet he moved through it as if through mist, and the crowd watching from the edge began to believe what they had only hoped before, that perhaps this man was not like the rest. He reached the monolith structure that hung just above the city without touching it, and with the shard he traced a line into the air. And that line glowed not with light, but with memory, and from it spilled sounds, voices, names of the first marked the first worlds consumed. And Calorith flinched because it remembered, and in its remembering, it showed weakness. A panel opened in its surface, not mechanical, not organic, something else entirely, and from it emerged a tendril of thought, a question not spoken, but projected into Jalen's mind, asking why he resisted, why he interfered when death was purity and life only clutter. And Jalen answered not with words, but with memory. A panel opened in its surface, not mechanical, not organic, something else entirely, and from it emerged a tendril of thought, a question not spoken, but projected into Jalen's mind, asking why he resisted, why he interfered when death was purity and life only clutter. And Jalen answered not with words, but with memory. He showed Calorith a field of yellow flowers where his sister had laughed before the storms took her. He showed it a broken android, holding hands with a boy it had raised until its power ran dry. He showed it 1,000 acts of quiet defiance, small and useless, yet eternal. And in those moments, the eye blinked again, and the mark on the people pulsed and dimmed, and the scream stopped, and something old and horrible recoiled, not in fear, but in calculation. The people saw Jalen as more than myth now. He had become momentum. He had touched the beast's face and returned untouched. And where he walked now, the marks peeled away, not all, not instantly, but enough that the air shifted and the hopeless dared to look up again. He was hunted, not by soldiers, but by shadows cast by Gareth itself, tendrils of thought sharpened into illusions meant to drive him mad. But Jalen's mind was anchored not by strength, but by grief and purpose, and that made him untouchable. In the north of the sector, on a cliff that overlooked the capital, he stood before a stone altar that had stood since before humans learned to build, and he placed the shard into its core and spoke a name he had never learned, but always known. And the sky split, and a scream rolled through space itself. Calorith surged forward, its eye now wide and wild, its surface cracking as ancient defenses awoke, and it fired something not seen but felt across the planet, and mountains shattered. But Jalen stood still, and the people behind him felt something inside them unlock. One by one the marks touched their skin and found only flesh, and the sigils fell like snow. And Calorith screamed it, not in pain, but in confusion, for it had never failed, never. But this human had shown it something unforgivable. Calorith opened fully, no longer a ship, no longer a god, but a thought unraveling its form, tearing into reality as if to rewrite itself to end the anomaly called Jalen. And in that moment, Jalen ran not toward safety, but into the core of the eye. Inside he found not machines, but memory walls, and within them a mirror. And in that mirror he saw not himself, but humanity. Not the wars, not the greed, but the hands holding hands, the ones who stood when they could have knelt. And he touched the mirror and whispered one word. Enough. Calorith blinked, and in that blink it faltered, and in that falter it fell. Not broken, but changed. The sky cleared, not with fire, but with silence, and the marks vanished completely, and people emerged from shelters and caves and wept without knowing why, only that the weight had gone. Jalen was never seen again, but the stone where he had stood bore a single line, etched by nothing and everything.